that it's gotten dark. God has called you and I to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment.
Tune in to the Hamilton Quarter, weekdays at 5 p.m. Central on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
If the failing New York Times has an anonymous editorial, can you believe it? Anonymous, meaning gutless, a gutless editorial. We're doing a great job. The poll numbers are through the roof. Our poll numbers are great. And guess what? Nobody is going to come close to beating me in 2020 because of what we've done.
I will say that I did willingly violate the chair's rule on the committee confidential process. I take full responsibility for violating that, sir. And I violated because I sincerely believe that the public deserves to know this nominee's record. In this particular case, his record on issues of race and the law.
So you're talking about the public right to know. You want to give up your emails right now? Make them public? I don't think you do.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Oh, yeah. Welcome back to Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. It's great to be with you today. So much breaking news and so much to get into. So, who's on the show? I got to tell you, I'm excited. My first time ever getting to interview Dr. Richard Land. He's going to come on today and talk to us about the Supreme Court nomination, the hearings that are going on that refer to Justice Kavanaugh and his performance thus far, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be great to talk to him. And then in hour two, we are going to talk to Stephen Solomon, who is a often guest on the show. He's often on the program, and he's coming on to discuss with us news of the day. And of course, this Facebook discriminating against conservatives. And so I've seen a bit of that, and we'll discuss it. And, go to afr.net, which is the website for American Family Radio. Go to urbanfamilytalk.com. That's for Urban Family. And let's get into the program. So, listen, the news from today that we were supposed to be all up in arms about was that Cory Booker, a senator from New Jersey and soon-to-be 2020 presidential candidate, he wants to pole vault ahead of Kamala Harris, and he wants to be that individual who would be able to do the part two of Barack Obama's successful runs at the presidency. And so he needs to make a name for himself. He needs to find a way to kind of cement his ability to command the news cycle. And so he took a document, a series of documents that were actually approved for release late last night, and he threatened to release them as if they were still committee confidential. So we're going to unpack all of that, and during the program, we're going to discuss whether or not it's really the right thing for different committees and different presidential administrations to keep documents classified and keep them away from the eyes of the American people. And I'm always about sunlight, and we have something called sunshine laws here in the state of Missouri, and I learned all about them when I was on school board, and I'm a huge proponent of taxpayers being able to review documents and records. And I also believe in the chain of ownership, and the people that are closest to those documents should be the ones to determine whether or not they are classified in nature and how much of that can be released to the public and at what times. Not because I don't believe we have the right to know. Quite contrary to that, I believe we do have the right to know, and we deserve the opportunity to review documents. But I also understand that there are certain national security concerns that come into play, and they're the reason that we have the classification system that we have, because it isn't always the right of tax-paying citizens to know that trumps the requirement that we keep certain information out of the hands of our enemies, who, coincidentally, our enemies read our newspapers, they read our websites, they pay attention to our magazines. Our enemies are intimately acquainted with our media and all of the information dissemination sources that we utilize. So you've got Cory Booker, and it's a straight-up performance. He in this audio clip, dares the Senate to expel him over knowingly violating the rules and compares himself to, hold on a second, yes, Spartacus. It's number one.
The idea that we could somehow go through your lengthy process, and these documents are, many of these documents are dumped us in the last minute, but to Senator Cornyn actually made a very good point. I knowingly violated the rules that were put forth, and I'm told that the committee confidential rules have knowing consequences. And so, sir, I come from a long line, as all of us do as Americans, and understand what that kind of civil disobedience is, and I understand the consequences. So I am right now, before your process is finished, I'm going to release the email about racial profiling, and I understand that the penalty comes with potential ousting from the Senate. And if Senator Cornyn believes that I violated Senate rules, I openly invite and accept the consequences of my team releasing that email right now. And I'm releasing it to expose that, number one, the emails that are being withheld from the public have nothing to do with national security, nothing to jeopardize the sanctity of those ideals that I hold dear. Instead, what I'm releasing this document right now to show, sir, is that we have a process here for a person, the highest office in the land, for a lifetime appointment. We're rushing through this before me and my colleagues can even read and digest the information.
So, do you hear the passion in his voice? The highest office in the land. An opportunity to confirm. Really? So, the Supreme Court is the highest office in the land? It's not. The presidency is the highest office in the land. That's first of all. And second of all, there's nothing unprecedented about not having documents that had nothing to do with his, his opinions or his, leading up to him being a judge. There's nothing that odd about not having that available. So we covered that. I'm not going to kind of rehash that. That was yesterday's show, and you can find the podcast at afr.net and Urban Family Talk. But it's just an amazing thing to listen to him. The way his voice is trembling, and boy, the video of it is just, it's outstanding to watch. Get your popcorn ready. He's in full acting mode. But the committee had already approved these documents for release the night before. So either he wasn't there, and that's something you can say that about Cory Booker. He often misses votes. But perhaps he wasn't in the committee room when the approval was made and his staff members didn't notify him, or he knew that, but he needed something with which to propel his name into the top of the news cycle, and he felt this would work. Whatever the case may be, it's not as he says. Now, Senator Cornyn actually lit into Booker for his comments, and I thought it was pretty interesting because Senator Cornyn doesn't often get worked up, yet here he is. He's pretty firm. It's number two.
Can I ask you how long you're going to say the same thing 3 or 4 times?
No, sir. How long do
you want?
I'm saying I'm knowingly violating the rules.
Okay.
Senator Cornyn called me out for it.
How many times you going to tell us,
sir? I'm saying right now that I'm releasing committee confidential documents.
Mr. Chairman, since the senator invoked my name, I insist on an opportunity to respond. I did not mention his name, but he mentioned my name, and he's right. Running for president is no excuse for violating the rules of the Senate or of the confidentiality of the documents that we are privy to. This is no different from the senator deciding to release classified information that is deemed classified by the executive branch because you happen to disagree with the classification decision. That is irresponsible and outrageous, and I hope that the senator will reconsider his decision, because no senator deserves to sit on this committee or serve in the Senate, in my view, if they decide to be a law unto themselves and willingly flout the rules of the Senate and the determination of confidentiality and classification. That is irresponsible and conduct unbecoming a senator.
So, yeah, so while he's grandstanding and making an utter nuisance of himself, you just have to, you're thinking to yourself, well, what was the real news that we missed because we were all paying attention to that? And I happened to be doing another project this morning, so I was unavailable to Twitter. And when I got back to it just for a couple of minutes, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what have I missed? I see that Spartacus is trending. And that, so I actually heard some of the audio earlier in the morning, and then I go into this prolonged series of meetings, and I come back out and Spartacus is trending on Twitter. And so I click, and there's just this melee going on with people like Ben Shapiro, and others are just tearing into Cory Booker and mocking him for comparing himself to Spartacus. And meanwhile, other news is that Russian nuclear bombers were intercepted near Alaska. Russian nuclear bombers were intercepted near Alaska. Now, I know liberals don't like to talk about Alaska anymore now that they can't connect it to Sarah Palin and some spurious comment that she never actually made. But the fact is, that's American territory. It's American soil. And that airspace belongs to us. And Russian bombers, especially those armed with nukes, should not be in our airspace. Now, I remember a day when if you ventured into our airspace, we'd lock onto you to let you know that we could take you down. It's one button. It's one thumb. It's just like a twitch. And boom, you're down. I guess that's not the rule anymore. We did assume a softer military positioning under President Obama. So you got 2 Russian nuclear-capable bombers interpreted by American F-22 jets near Alaska. And this is according to Northern Command. The bombers were detected flying near the Aleutian Islands, said Michael Kukarek, a spokesman for the Northern Command and North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD. 2 Alaskan-based NORAD F-22 fighters intercepted and visually identified 2 Tu-95 Bear long-range bomber aircraft flying in the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone south of the Aleutian Islands. Kukarek declined to specify the distance that the bombers flew from the west coast of Alaska to protect operational security. However, the 2 Russian Tu-95 bomber aircraft were intercepted and monitored by the F-22s until the bombers left the ADIZ along the Aleutian Island chain heading west. At no time did the Russian bombers enter Canadian or United States sovereign airspace, but they were still near Alaska. So testing the waters, dipping a toe in, checking to see if is it warm? Is it lukewarm? Is this thing on? That type of thing. And they were escorted off. The bombers themselves are capable of carrying the nuclear-tipped KH-55 long-range cruise missile that has a maximum range of up to 1,841 miles. Now, this is they're assuming that these bombers were practicing cruise missile strikes on U.S. missile defenses in Alaska. So they're practicing. They're playing a little bit of war game over off our coast. Now, Cobra Dane would be one of the first targets of a Russian air-launched cruise missile strike in the early stages of a conflict. What's Cobra Dane? Well, the intercept took place near something called Cobra Dane, which is a large phased array radar system that monitors Russian missile launches and aircraft flights. The radar is located at Erickson Air Station on remote Shemya Island, one of the Aleutians located 1,455 miles west of Anchorage. So they're probing our systems and checking to see what our response times are. And I remember being on active duty, and when we were stationed on a temporary duty assignment in Saudi Arabia, and we were there on a rotation to support the no-fly zone Operation Desert Shield after Desert Storm. And we would sit on the flight line in our office. We had a radio in there, and we would listen to the pilots chatter. And they would regularly get locked onto by surface-to-air missile units on the ground on the other side. And so they'd be patrolling the no-fly zone, and they'd get locked onto. And then they would, they'd do what they had been trained to do. Now, they weren't ever shot at, not while I was there for the 90-day tour that I was, participating in, but it's frightening because when you get locked onto, it's basically, like I said, it's just an itchy finger and you're down. So I just wonder, we were escorting, but did we lock on? I guess that's not something they're going to share. I guess it'd have to be on active duty listening to the radio in the front on the flight line office to find that out. But I wonder. All right, when we get back, we're going to have Dr. Richard Land right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Hello, I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Well, the last 2 years, we've just had tremendous response, early response to the announcement that we're going to Israel on a Holy Land tour. We're going March of this year. We go March of every year. Last year, we filled up like early fall, and I expect us to fill up early fall this year as well. So if you're interested in this March 14th through the 22nd tour, and you'll be going with primarily supporters of AFA and AFR, just get the brochure and check it out. You can call us today at 800-FAMILIES, 800-FAMILIES, option 5, and leave us your name and your address, and we'll mail you a brochure. If you simply want to go online, all the information is there. It's at twholyland.com, twholyland.com. If you want to go in March, we're filling up, and we're filling up fast. So check it out, twholyland.com.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a legacy moment. I grew up in what was then called the Central Ward of Newark, New Jersey. And in our neighborhood, everybody knew each other, and for a kid, this had its drawbacks. It was hard to get away with things. For example, when I was about 12 years old, a couple of my friends and I were smoking behind a building. We thought we'd gotten away with it. But as soon as I walked into our house, my mother said, "Oh, so now you're smoking, huh?" I said to myself, how in the world does this lady know this? Does she have eyes in the back of her head? What happened was that one of the neighbors had spotted us, and before I could get home, remember, this was before cell phones and the internet, my mother knew all about it. Boy, did I ever get in trouble. I learned a very important lesson that day. More people are watching us than we realize. But that's not all bad. In fact, in Titus chapter 2, verses 6 through 8, we find that there may also be people watching us who are looking for an opportunity to hurt us. Listen to these words. Likewise, urge the young men to be sensible. In all things, show yourself to be an example of good deeds, with purity in doctrine, dignified, sound in speech, which is beyond reproach, in order that the opponent will be put to shame, having nothing bad to say about us. Paul says, remember, this is not just your life to live any old way you want. Be sensible. Be an example. Don't give others a reason to say anything bad about you. Demonstrate spiritual sensibility. Well, here's what I want you to remember today. Pay close attention to this. Embrace the reality that we are being watched. We need to make sure that we're not doing anything wrong. And obviously, the word will get back.
Join Crawford Loritz tomorrow for another Legacy Moment.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the show. It's time for more Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. And our next guest is an expert, fantastically well-educated, and a leader in Christian ministry and really political thought all over the entire United States and internationally, really. Dr. Richard Land. He's joining us to talk about the antics and details surrounding the hearings around Brett Kavanaugh and his soon-to-be appointment to the Supreme Court of the United States. Dr. Land, thank you for joining us today.
It's my delight to be with you.
So let's talk about this a bit. We've seen antics. We've seen people allowed into the hearing room. They're sitting there in the back. They wait until a Republican is about to speak, and then they pipe up with screaming and yelling, and they're disrupting the proceedings. But beyond that kind of circus atmosphere, how do you think that Justice Kavanaugh has fared under the scrutiny that he's receiving right now?
Well, considering the antics of the protesters and of the Democratic senators on the committee, I think he's doing very well. He's maintaining dignity. I'm sorry that his daughters had to witness the antics of the first day. But I thought that Senator Lindsey Graham summed it up pretty well this morning. He said, you know, people have said that these hearings are like a circus, He said, I want to rise in defense of circuses. Circuses are entertaining, and they're fun, and children can attend. He said, these hearings aren't entertaining, they're not fun, and children shouldn't attend.
I couldn't agree with him more. In fact, as you were saying that, as soon as he said circus, I thought back to, 5-6 years ago, us at the circus with our kids. We were all laughing and eating popcorn and enjoying ourselves. I would not hesitate to take our kids to a circus, while I have to say I would not feel comfortable with our children in that room with those protesters at the back. I mean, really.
No, it just was, the Democrats on the committee now, look, I understand their panic. Because they have been ruling the country through a non-elected judicial imperium for the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. Most of the things that they desperately wanted that they have not been able to get through the legislative process, they've gotten by court edicts: same-sex marriage, abortion on demand, a whole host of things. Now, that's getting ready to come to a rapid end. This Kavanaugh confirmation is the last nail in the coffin, because we're going to have a majority of Supreme Court justices, and I understand that right now it's on track for Donald Trump to have nominated 1/8 of the entire federal judiciary by the end of this year.
It's amazing.
And his nominees have all been strict constructionist, original intent jurists, which means they all see themselves as umpires who call strikes and balls according to the strike zone that is laid down by the Constitution and by the laws of the United States. They're not going to legislate, and they're not going to compose from the bench. They're going to call balls and strikes, not create a new strike zone.
It's amazing. So, Dr. Land, as you're talking about the 1/8 of the appointments, I really would love for you to kind of unpack for the listeners when we talk about these other judicial appointments, they're not really making a lot of news. A couple of left-leaning pundits have gotten on CNN and said he's remaking the courts for the next generation, which is something that if you care about the Constitution, this is a wonderful development. I'm so glad that he's getting the opportunity to do this. But this is just the first year. Could you give us an estimate of how much more he'll be able to do during the remainder of his term as it pertains to these courts that have become so activist?
Well, if he's done 1/8 in 2 years, then he'd do, let's just say he's on track, he'd do another 1/8 in 2 more years, and then, so that's 1/4. Mm-hmm. And then if he gets another term, just on average, he would have appointed half of all the judges in the federal judiciary by the time he leaves office in 8 years. And, of course, there's now a functional conservative majority on the Supreme Court once Kavanaugh is confirmed. And the 2 oldest justices on the court are the 2 most liberal, Ginsburg and Breyer. And the oldest conservative is Justice Thomas, who's 70. Ginsburg is 86, and Breyer is 79. So, the actuarial tables tell us that the next 2 vacancies will be liberal judges who would be replaced by conservatives, which would mean that the Supreme Court would be conservative for the next 20 years. To me, this was one of the major reasons to vote for Donald Trump, because if Mrs. Clinton had been elected, the Supreme Court would have been lost for 20 years. Well, now the liberals are saying that's lost to them for 20 years. Now, the difference is that a conservative Supreme Court is not going to try to impose its will on the American people. It's going to let the American people, through their elected representatives, pass their own laws and see if they confirm and conform to the Constitution. It's as Chief Justice John Roberts said in the same-sex marriage decision, and his dissenting opinion, you could turn off the lights and it would glow in the dark. He said, now this is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, this decision today has nothing whatsoever to do with the Constitution of the United States. It is 5 unelected lawyers seeking to impose their definition of marriage on the American people.
I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the things that was so important about yesterday's hearing was that we had this, it was like these two beautiful moments. One was Senator Ted Cruz, and he was explaining why we see so many Americans protesting the Supreme Court, because they see the Supreme Court as being the ultimate arbiter of law, when the Supreme Court's role is actually, as you described so aptly, the balls and strikes. So, Dr. Land, how do, if the president succeeds, well, first of all, I do believe Kavanaugh will be confirmed, so that will give the functional majority to the conservatives. But if there are 2 more justices and he appoints them as well, the 2 most liberal justices, will not the Congress be forced to go back to its primary role of creating law and getting it through the process, which means, the American people have a say, and then getting it onto the president's desk if they want to change things or right wrongs, et cetera?
Yes, it'll restore the system. It'll restore constitutional balance to the system. And so if liberals want to change the law, they'll need to do it the old-fashioned way. Get elected to Congress and pass legislation, not do it through judicial imperial edict.
So let's talk a little bit about the hearings themselves, which have obviously, I'm actually embarrassed by the behavior of some of the people on the left side of the aisle in their demeanor towards Justice Kavanaugh, because he's really proven to be very even-keeled, and he appears to be quite humble, actually, in his answers. And he seems unprovocable, which Kamala Harris specifically appeared to attempt to provoke him to wrath on numerous occasions during her questioning. She was unable to he was unflappable. So what do you see them doing? This is the last day. What do you see happening next?
Well, they'll try to do the same thing in the Senate, in the full Senate, when it comes up for a vote. Since Harry Reid invoked the nuclear option for judicial nominees, it was inevitable it was going to come for Supreme Court nominees, and frankly, I think that's a good thing. I don't think you need a supermajority. A supermajority, which is required by a filibuster, is not in the Constitution. It's a Senate rule, and I think it probably helps for legislation because it causes compromise to take place. But you can't confirm part of a judge. You either confirm the judge or you don't confirm the judge. And I believe that should be a simple majority. And so I believe that Judge Kavanaugh will get 54, 55 votes. I think in the end, when it becomes clear that he's going to get the Republican votes and he's going to be confirmed, that Schumer and the Democrats will let some of the most vulnerable Democratic senators who are running for re-election in states that Trump carry between 10 and 20 points, that they'll allow them to go ahead and vote for Kavanaugh, try to protect that seat. Donnelly in Indiana, the senator from Missouri, the senator from Montana, et cetera, senator from West Virginia.
That's what I was just going to ask you, Dr. Land, because I'm in Missouri. So, Claire McCaskill.
Senator McCaskill.
Yeah. So you think she's actually, she didn't vote for Gorsuch. She voted against him.
No, but I think that Schumer will tell her when it becomes clear that the Republicans have the votes, he'll tell her, look, if it'll help you get reelected, go ahead.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm dying to see what she actually does, because she's even started saying in her campaign materials, like on television, she'll openly admit that Missouri is a red state. No statewide elected Democrats. What do I do? This is the hardest race I've ever run in my life. And I've been really surprised, because she's usually so strong and firm and, feminist-like. So it's been interesting to see the change in her since the turn of the, fortunes.
Well, an approaching election focuses the attention.
We hope. I think it's a temporary condition, Dr. Land. So let's kind of unpack a little bit. There was this awful New York Times anonymous letter, And I've read so many things, Dr. Land, over the past, like, the 24 hours or so since it came out, from people who they think it's this person, they think it's that person. I really think it's immaterial who it is. The fact that the New York Times published an anonymous op-ed from a high-ranking Trump official, which could be any one of 1,000 people, by the way, who are, political appointees who could satisfy that general term. I think it really, this is like, to me, a turning point, a place where you put a pin in the timeline where we're going to see a precipitous degradation in, even further than we have seen, in the media coverage as it pertains to the president.
Gosh, I don't even know how that was possible.
Yeah, well, I think they have further down to go.
90% of the stories about the president have been negative. The New York Times is, what Trump has done is he's caused a derangement syndrome. They've become addicted to anti-Trumpism, and it's caused them to expose themselves. They don't even have a semblance or even attempt at objectivity anymore. And what it's done is it's lowered the American people's trust in them. They've lost all credibility with two-thirds of the American people. The American people are basically divided into three groups. There are the conservatives, about one-third, the liberals, about one-third, and about one-third in the middle. And the middle decides elections. And the middle doesn't trust the media anymore. The conservatives don't trust the media, and the liberals don't, and the middle doesn't trust the media. So two-thirds of the American people, they increasingly don't care what the New York Times says. They don't care what NBC and MSNBC and ABC and CBS say, and they increasingly tune them out. And so they're losing their credibility. And this is, look, you have to understand, Trump is a revolutionary figure. He is remaking American political life like no one has since Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt fundamentally altered the political alignment in the United States. President Trump is doing the same thing. He's creating a new Republican Party in the same way that Franklin Roosevelt created a new Democratic Party when he came in 1933. And the new Republican Party scares the pants off the old Republican Party, and this is an attempt to drain the swamp, although I think that it's very, very charitable to call it a swamp. It's a cesspool.
Mm.
It's not a swamp.
I agree.
It's a cesspool. And Donald Trump is draining the cesspool. What we've allowed to be created in this country over the last 40 years is a bipartisan political establishment that gives every indication of existing for its own benefit and its own promotion, and doesn't give a whit about the American people. And the American people finally figured it out, and they finally had someone who ran for president who said, "I'm on your side." And he's proving that he is.
I'm enjoying it.
I mean, do you realize that? That unemployment for people who don't have a high school education is lower than it's ever been in the history of the country? Unemployment for blacks, unemployment for women, unemployment for Hispanics is lower than it's ever been since they've been keeping those statistics in the country. The people who are benefiting, it's not the corporations, it's small businesses, it's construction, it's blue collar. The deplorables that Hillary Clinton made the big mistake of telling us what she really thought about them.
I'm just excited about it.
It's fundamentally remaking the country, and you understand that the establishment, which is a Republican and Democratic establishment, they can feel the oxygen being taken out of their lungs, and they are fighting back with every means at their disposal. And frankly, I don't know how the president keeps going, but he does. I was there last week. I was there for a dinner last Monday night. And he's like the Energizer Bunny on steroids. He just keeps going.
I'm so glad about that. I'm glad that he's got the energy to do it. We're getting to the end of the segment, and I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on today. Dr. Richard Land, So wonderful to speak with you and to get your expertise on the Kavanaugh nomination and other issues of the day. Thank you, sir.
Well, let's keep praying for the president.
Amen. Let's pray for him, and we'll hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. We'll be back with more right after this. Stay there.
What does it take to live an uncommon life? Here's former Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy with today's uncommon moment.
After the journey of writing our first book, Quiet Strength, God impressed upon me and my co-author Nathan Whitaker that his measurement of success had little to do with sales numbers. We were blessed to have great numbers, but that's not what made the book a success in God's eyes. God's scorecard is different from ours. He doesn't judge by money, statistics, or fame, but by the state of our hearts and our desire to serve Him. God calls us to be faithful, not successful. Real success often happens behind the scenes, and only God can measure it accurately. The only thing that's really important is that His purposes are accomplished.
New York Times best-selling author Tony Dungy. Discover more at CoachDungy.com. That's CoachDungy.com.
My name's Brandon. I never imagined dealing drugs would end up costing my family so much. But when Teen Challenge opened the doors for me, I got the second chance I so desperately needed. Now I'm drug-free, and I'm making up for lost time.
If you know an adult or teenager who's struggling with a chemical addiction, Teen Challenge can help. Call us today at 417-581-2181 or reach us online at teenchallengeusa.com. This is Urban Family Talk.
Y'all have encouraged us to go out, stand for the Word of God, stand politically.
It's truly a blessing to hear how God is using Urban Family Talk.
Just want to say I love everything that Urban Family does.
Will you take a moment to share your story? Call 877-327-5647. That's 877-327-5647. Thanks.
Securing America.
The United Nations Security Council has a new president every month. September's leader is U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley.
An American theme in every way, but it will also have a Southern twist to it. As basically, when things get intense, we smile, and when they get more intense, we smile bigger.
Haley takes the post at an incredibly busy time, with a fear of more chemical attacks in Syria and possible nuclear violations in North Korea, and the General Assembly drawing most of the world's leaders, including a visit from President Trump, who plans to chair a meeting on Iran's threats to world stability. Ambassador Haley says she'll lead a call for action on the drug problem and is putting Russia and China on notice when it comes to supporting rogue regimes.
It flies in the face of the international community for Russia and China to not follow the same rules as everyone else.
As President Haley is also turning up pressure on the Arab world to step up and help the Palestinian people. At the UN, Rick Leventhal, Fox News.
You can download episodes of Stacy on the Right from the podcast page on AFR.net or UrbanFamilyTalk.com. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
This is about the closest I'll probably ever have in my life to an I am Spartacus moment.
I'm Spartacus! 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 I'm Spartacus!
So GOP put that little bit out on online social media to just to add some levity to the situation about Cory Booker saying that he's Spartacus. This is the closest he's ever going to get to being Spartacus. He went really close because Spartacus was a man of war. And Cory Booker's a senator from New Jersey. Well, that's not really the same kind of guy. Sorry, it's just not. I think maybe he feels like this was like a moment for him, and it was just a little fizzle. The same with Kamala Harris's weird questioning of the nominee. So I'm all about getting, exposing, getting at the truth, digging in, having these nominees answer hard questions. And I think we would see more of that if people would stop grandstanding and if they would just stop letting the protesters into the space. They should have TVs on the outside, and anyone who's not, an approved guest of someone who's in the space should be on the outside. And then those who are approved guests, I believe that the people that they're approved guests of should be held accountable for their behavior. So if Democrats bring people in as guests and those guests turn out to be hardened protesters, that those Democrats should be called on the carpet by the committee chair and made to answer for bringing people in to disrupt the space. The fact that children, the children of the nominee, can't be present in the space because of the dangerous nature of the protesters, that speaks volumes, and it really looks bad. Dr. Land spoke of the third of Americans who are in the middle. Whenever I meet someone who's a moderate, and we start talking about politics, they always shock me with how they're really, really, they're not kidding about being in the middle. They're literally in the middle, which is such a weird place for me to kind of, it's a place I don't really understand. I don't understand the middle. I understand the hard left, and I understand being on the right. The middle is hard for me to really comprehend. And so I respect it, because often when someone is really a Democrat, but they're just saying they're a moderate, once you probe them a little bit, you can hear those hard left leanings. You can hear them. They start sharing them. But with a true moderate, they really are, they're opposed to any kind of like the nastiness. They're opposed to that. People who inhabit the middle politically are the kind who they really just want to be left alone. And so they're kind of leave me alone on the left's obsession with social issues. They're like, leave me alone on the right's, kind of working markets and capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. And they're kind of like, leave me alone on the government. They want to fund the government enough for it to work, but they don't really want to go overboard. So they're moderate. And when I talk to them, I sometimes feel like there's so much respect that I have for someone who's truly able to articulate their beliefs from that part of the political spectrum. But there's also a real, it's kind of like there's just tired of, they're exhausted by, if you feel exhausted by it, people in the middle express the most vehement opposition to me personally when I talk to them over the nastiness, the, not being able to be friends unless you're on the same side politically. They're the ones who most often decry that. And I respect that a lot. I know I don't agree with moderates on, a ton of issues, but the moderates at least are willing to listen to both arguments and then be drawn over by the side that is better able to articulate it without resorting to name calling and losing their minds. And so in some ways, listening to Dr. Land talk about this, for a fact that it's this kind of amazing phenomenon that when people get really offended by the nastiness, they tend to go in the opposite direction. So it's not really that their minds have been changed per se. They're just exhausted by the horrible discourse. And so I think the left is doing a disservice to whatever cause they're trying to promote by allowing the nastiness to be basically the modus operandi. That's just the way things are. It's not just the way things are. We should constantly fight against that and try to have substantive, productive discourse. So it's the last segment. If you want to call in, please, 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. It's raining here in the Midwest. And, it's supposed to be starting today, which is Thursday. It's supposed to be Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It's supposed to be like a monsoon here in the Midwest, which will make all of the grass that we just cut last weekend grow like crazy. And will also store up quite a bit of water for the fall, and hopefully we'll save some of that for the winter months. And so I want to get to, there's a bit of information from online about, there were a couple of other breaking news bits. I am always surprised by people who choose to call me during the radio show. I'm like, who doesn't know me and doesn't know that I'm unavailable during my radio show? I can't talk on the phone during the radio show. Sorry. It's just not the right thing to do. And so people call, they seem like all day long I'm available, and then at like between 2 and 4, people want to call. So there's one of the big stories, obviously, was this New York Times op-ed. And I think Dr. Land's perspective was interesting because he was saying, look, the people in the middle don't trust the media either. So you've got 2/3 of the American people, that's definitely a majority, not trusting the media, which means the things that they're putting out to try to influence some of those people to vote a certain way won't work. So it's not really a conservative liberal thing. It's a, hey, we don't trust the media thing. So whoever controls the media, they're not getting more trust by doing these anonymous op-eds, et cetera, et cetera. And so over at the Washington Post, where democracy dies in darkness, and it's got to be pretty dark over there, they are using this op-ed to create even more traction. So articles about the op-ed. And it's a fascinating way of doing it. And if you look around, you see this happen a lot. One news story spawns a bunch of op-eds, and then people write about the op-eds. And that's the news cycle for a story. So it doesn't have to have any new information. It's just people's opinions about the original bit of information and what other people wrote about it. That's what they're doing here with this. And you can tell it's a coordinated media attack because it comes in as an anonymous op-ed and then immediately gets picked up by all of the news outlets who then send their op-ed writers to write about it. I wanted to kind of just, this is the way I see the entire thing cracking out. There's been a lot of speculation, and there's even like the online betting sites have picked up the story, and they're now pushing out like odds it's Pence, odds it's not Pence. There's a few things we know. First of all, it's not Mike Pence who wrote this op-ed. It would be to refer to yesterday's show, a unicorn of epic proportions if we had, even any inkling that it was Mike Pence. But Mike Pence has an evangelical base, and he is not going to pen an anonymous op-ed as the vice president of the United States. It's just out of the question. Well, okay, let's go to the phones. I think that the thing says Clark in Georgia. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Stacey. How you doing, girl?
Doing fine. How are you?
Hey, good. You're like a breath of fresh air on the radio. I'll tell you that. I love listening to you. Like I was telling the lady that answered the phone, I think as Republicans, we're actually really falling down on our job because what we should be doing is the people that we know out here, we need to explain to them why are we a Republican. That we believe in God. We don't believe in abortion. We believe in getting to keep our guns. We believe in what's right. And you'll be surprised how many people they say they're Democrats, they're going to tell you they believe exactly the same thing we believe. And I think we just need to educate them.
You know what, Clark? I agree. In fact, I often say one of the things that I think is interesting is how we're kind of meek about what we believe, but the Bible doesn't talk about us being meek at all. The Bible talks about us going out courageously contending for the faith. And if we are truly holding our worldview, which it's apolitical. If you're a Christian, your worldview, it really isn't about politics. It's about adhering to the Word of God. And then you just find the platform that most closely mirrors what God's Word tells us to do, and you faithfully try to apply that. That doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, because there will be people who don't do it right. There will be politicians who make mistakes, who steal, rob, whatever. But you're trying to adhere to the platform and say, look, this one at least lines up with God's Word on the issues that are most important. Self-protection, obviously. The Second Amendment, that's important. That's in the Bible. It's biblical. And also pro-life and other things, just like you mentioned. I agree with you, Clark. We got to do a better job of selling what it is that we believe, because it is right.
A lot of these people that are running right now, a lot of people, they have no clue what they're voting for. They just say they're voting for the person because they like that person because they're a Democrat. I mean, we need to expose who these people are. If they're pro-abortion, if they're for taking God out of everything, we need to be telling that. That's what we got to do. That's our job.
It is. And, thanks for calling, Clark. I have to say, one of the things that I think is most important about what Clark just said is that, so if someone's voting for someone because they like them, and it's regardless of the political affiliation, but that person that they like is going against what that church-going, Bible-believing Christian person is being taught on Sunday, that we're held accountable for that. Not like we're holding each other accountable, but that God will hold us accountable. I had someone send me something on social media saying, well, you know, God doesn't have a political party. Well, of course not. God is bigger than political parties. But we do have to answer for the decisions that we make. And voting is one of the arenas in which we make decisions on you know, a pretty regular basis, depending on which elections you're choosing to vote in or choosing not to vote in, which is a decision also. So I'm never going to say one political party is God's political party, but I am going to say that the Bible says the pro-life issue is of great importance to our Father in heaven, and that our Constitution was created by individuals who, all of them, were Christians, people of faith, and they created it for a moral and religious people. If you don't believe me, go back and read the documents, because don't shoot the messenger, y'all. Go read the documents and then take your beef up with the founders, because that's what they said. The changing of that, the teaching of different things in school, doesn't change the fact or the historical aspect of how this country was founded. And I'll just say one more thing. You know, there are so many people who get in the pew on Sundays and, you know, Wednesdays and, you know, Saturdays, some folks, and they're in there raising their hands up and praising God and listening to the teaching and the preaching and enjoying it, and, you know, even participating in Bible studies and really, you know, living for Christ. But if you're not participating in the political arena, it leaves that participation to people who aren't in church with you on Sunday, people who don't believe the Word of God is true. So we should test the party platforms and then vote according to what God's Word says. So that's not a political party. That's issue-based voting. And that is much more, it's a way of holding the actual votes accountable and making sure that they line up with what God's Word says. And kind of, if you hear me saying biblical worldview and you're thinking, I don't even, you know, what is she talking about? It's easy to find out what the biblical worldview is. In fact, let me make a note. Why don't we have a chat about that? The biblical worldview. What is it? Why do we need it? And how do we understand if we have it or not? We'll do a segment on that, maybe even 2 segments, and I'll see if I can get us a good guest to go along with it, because it's important for us to have that. When the Barna Group does their surveys, the most recent surveys show that such a small percentage of Americans have a biblical worldview. That's really horrible for us. And the reason it's horrible is because the Bible makes us wise. God's Word is health and life to our bones. He blesses the obedient. He rains down blessings upon the obedient. When we're obedient to God, God's Word talks about His blessings chasing us down and overflowing, so basically running us over. So in almost every other case, I'd say 99.9% of the time, I don't want to be run over. But if you're talking about being run over by blessings, sign me up. I would love to be run over by blessings. But in order to get there, I don't have to just talk about being obedient or think about being obedient or tell other people to be obedient. I have to actually conscientiously be obedient myself. And so if we worry about ourselves and get that part lined up, we are better equipped and positioned to speak that truth into the lives of others and impact our world for Christ, which is what He wants us to do. Not politically, but the entire world for Christ, starting right here, wherever you may happen to be. All right, that's the first hour. We'll be back with hour 2 right after this. Stay there.
Urban Family Talk.
As millennials, we have more than $1 trillion in purchasing power, so you know businesses are watching us. But millennials are losing our faith, so we know Satan is watching us. Engage Magazine is for millennials by millennials, and it speaks to faith, purpose, and a closer walk with Jesus. Because above all, God is watching us. Visit EngageMagazine.net and listen Saturday afternoons at 5:30 Central on AFR.
Truth, wisdom, empowered urban family talk. A ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. It's another day in the hot seat for Supreme Court nominee Judge Brett Kavanaugh. John Decker has more.
Brett Kavanaugh is set to face a second round of questions from the Senate Judiciary Committee today, with senators getting 20 minutes each. Yesterday, Kavanaugh repeatedly said he didn't want to weigh in on cases that could come before the High Court. The nominee is also likely to be questioned about his work on Ken Starr's independent counsel investigation of former President Bill Clinton and his time working in the White House under former President George W. Bush. Yesterday, Kavanaugh wouldn't say whether a president could pardon himself or must comply with a subpoena. On Capitol Hill, John Decker, Fox News.
Wednesday's Capitol Hill hearings featuring social media companies have triggered an announcement from the Department of Justice. More from Tanya J. Powers.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions will meet with state attorneys general later this month to talk about concerns by conservatives that their voices are being stifled on social media platforms. The announcement came from the Justice Department yesterday after testimony in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee by Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg and Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey. President Trump and some Republicans have accused tech companies of discriminating against conservatives with bias in their treatment on the platforms. Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
A Northern California wildfire is so intense that truckers had to abandon their rigs. Jeff Manasso has the latest.
The charred remains of over a dozen big rigs litter a 45-mile stretch of I-5 around the Shasta Trinity National Forest as truckers and others flee the Delta fire that erupted Wednesday and that burned some 5,000 acres with scattered homes and cabins under evacuation orders. The fast-moving fire that's believed to be human-caused is 0% contained. CAL FIRE also saying the attack from the air is hampered due to a shortage of pilots. The blaze also delaying Amtrak's Coast Starlight service between Sacramento and Oregon. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
The Trump administration is ready to slam China with its biggest tariff increase yet.
President Trump may hit about $200 billion worth of Chinese goods coming into the U.S. with new tariffs. The decision to be made after the deadline for public comment ends today. In a brewing trade war between the world's two largest economies, the president's already slapped 25% tariffs on $34 billion worth of Chinese imports in July and another $16 billion last month. The Chinese have been retaliating and putting tariffs on U.S. imports. Now they're reported to be ready to impose new tariffs on $60 billion worth of American goods if President Trump acts on his latest threat. In Washington, Jill Nato, Fox News.
He says he's doing it to raise awareness about so-called social justice. But activist and Black Lives Matter supporter Colin Kaepernick might want to consider what his new partner is doing to black babies in the womb. Chris Woodward explains.
While his talents on the football field earned him a trip to the Super Bowl in 2013, Colin Kaepernick has since become a household name of sorts for taking a knee during the national anthem. While critics of the move say it is disrespectful to the flag and the U.S. military, Kaepernick maintains it is about societal problems. He told NFL media in 2016 that he was not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that he says oppresses black people and people of color. This week, Kaepernick was back in the headlines after Nike announced he would be the face of its Just Do It campaign. Robert Kuykendall of Second Vote finds it interesting.
Nike is a donor to Planned Parenthood. They have a matching gift program. And Nike also donates to an organization called the Population Council. And they specifically target black populations, other non-white populations, for the expansion of abortion. So while Colin Kaepernick is aligning himself with the Black Lives Matter movement and leading these protests to say that America is a racist nation, he's also partnering with a company that funds the destruction of black lives through abortion.
I'm Chris Woodward.
The Dow is down 25 points at 25,949. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Y'all have encouraged us to go out, stand for the Word of God, stand politically.
It's truly a blessing to hear how God is using Urban Family Talk.
Just want to say I love everything that Urban Family does.
Will you take a moment to share your story? Call 877-327-5647. That's 877-327-5647. Thanks.
She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
If the failing New York Times has an anonymous editorial, can you believe it? Anonymous, meaning gutless, a gutless editorial. We're doing a great job. The poll numbers are through the roof. Our poll numbers are great. And guess what? Nobody is going to come close to beating me in 2020 because of what we've done.
I will say that I did willingly violate the chair's rule on the committee confidential process. I take full responsibility for violating that, sir. And I violate it because I sincerely believe that the public deserves to know this nominee's record. In this particular case, his record on issues of race and the law.
So you're talking about the public right to know. You want to give up your emails right now? Make them public? I don't think you do.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Welcome back to the program. Great to be with you. I want to ask for those listener stories. Hey, we need you to call in to 877-327-5647, 877-327-5647, and give us your story of how Urban Family Talk has encouraged you, how we've been a blessing to you, how maybe you've shared Urban Family Talk and you and a friend are listening to it and being blessed by it. Call now or in your spare time this weekend. We'd love to hear your voice on the air. It's a voicemail that you leave. It's really fast, and then we take that and turn it into a quick little promo for Share-a-thon, which is coming up in about 6 weeks. So we're looking for those phone calls. The stories will actually air in the weeks prior to Share-a-thon and during Share-a-thon. The number again is 877-327-5647. So let's talk again about those confidential documents. Senator Mike Lee went on to explain the law surrounding those, and I thought this was a fantastic bit of audio because sometimes we hear, oh, it's confidential documents, and we don't really go in depth as to why they're confidential and who has the power to make them confidential or to declassify them. And so here's Senator Mike Lee explaining the confidential document law.
If you want everything to be made public or all the emails that you have, whether I think they're protected for 50 years for United States senators. So you're talking about the public right to know. Do you want to give up your emails right now? Make them public? I don't think you do. Senator Lee.
First of all, Mr. Chairman, I want to say I'm deeply sympathetic to the frustration people feel when they don't have access to documents they want. As a United States Senator, I've faced this on a number of occasions. There have been times when we've been called upon to vote on legislation literally at the midnight hour, sometimes much later than that we haven't seen until moments before it was voted on. There have been other times, and I kid you not, when I've been asked to vote on a piece of legislation that has an annex to it, and I've told that I can't see the annex to the legislation because it's classified, and it's classified in a way that I don't have access to because of a committee assignment that I do not have. It's incredibly frustrating. In those circumstances, we look for a demon. There are demons in those circumstances. They are too numerous to name here. In this circumstance, there is a demon, but that demon is a law of our own creation. It's called the Presidential Records Act. That's the demon that you're after here. That is the only reason we've got this issue.
So this isn't about anything trying to being withheld that has anything to do with the nominee. And he goes on to finish out the entire explanation. And meanwhile, this is during the committee hearing. So just Judge Kavanaugh sitting there. You got Cory Booker sitting there. He's got this look on his face. You would think that someone was torturing pups right there in front of him. And he was just, in a state of utter abject horror. But that's not what was going on. He was really, honestly, just grandstanding and putting on for the cameras. Here's Mike Lee, too.
Now, the custodian of those documents holds and exercises a privilege on behalf of the Bush administration. These are documents we would otherwise not have access to because they are privileged. Pursuant to an agreement with the Senate, as an accommodation to the Senate, the custodian of those records has agreed, notwithstanding the privileged nature of those documents, to hand them over to us with an understanding that when there is a need that arises with respect to one or more of those documents to make them public, we can, as a committee, go through a process to do that. That is exactly what has happened. It's what has worked, and it's what has worked here today. So if you're frustrated with the process, then let's review the Presidential Records Act. But we're just doing what the law allows us here to do. These documents are not ours. They belong to someone else. It is not written into the Constitution. It's not written on stone tablets anywhere that we're entitled to documents that don't belong to us. It's significant that William Howard Taft didn't release his presidential papers. It's significant that Robert Jackson, having served as Attorney General, didn't release all the papers he had as Attorney General. Why? Well, I assume it had a lot to do with the fact that they didn't belong to us as a Senate. If we want to be able to have a process, not just with this administration, but in every presidential administration, Democratic, Republican, or of any other stripe in the future, we need to respect the process and respect the privilege that is accorded to documents that do not belong to us. That's all we're asking, and the process is working.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's working all right. I just don't. So this was supposed to be a fantastic moment for him, and it just blew up, and it's not worked. Expect to see more. This is his first attempt. He will attempt something like this again. Getting expelled from the Senate would make him a very sympathetic character to certain voting blocks in this country, and he's not been able to generate news otherwise. So, you know, he's going to be looking for a way to get his colleagues to push him out so he can spend all of his time working on running for the presidency. I think it's an interesting tactic for him to take. I don't think it's going to work. Meanwhile, breaking news, Burt Reynolds is trending on Twitter, and the reason he's doing so is because he's just passed away at the age of 82. He starred in Deliverance, Cannonball Run, The Longest Yard, Smokey and the Bandit, and so many other movies. A Hollywood icon. He's just passed away, and you're going to see a lot of news and probably commemorations for him as the day goes on and into tomorrow. It'll be interesting to see if the liberals choose to, you know, kind of try to vilify him. I don't know what his politics were, which is actually a positive. Like, that's a compliment. But that's breaking news right now. So aside from the records and the different things that are going on with the hearing, it really hasn't gone badly for Judge Kavanaugh, at least from what I can tell. And I've listened to hours of it now. Not every minute, but I have listened to hours of it. And it has been, in my opinion, he's really acquitted himself well. He has actually spent the time to explain things that you can tell that the questioners didn't expect him to explain it. And then when he takes the time to explain it, the follow-on questions are kind of, it's like, you know, you're like, wait, are they talking to the same person? What's this? What? I'm continuing questions from Senator so-and-so from last night. And you're thinking, well, how's he supposed to remember that line of questioning? He's been sitting there for like 14 hours, you know, not straight, but 8 hours today at least. So the other breaking news, Amway co-founder Richard DeVos is dead at 92. Wow. Pretty amazing. Amway. If you guys remember Amway from back in the day, people who used to sell Amway. What a network of individuals. People who had Amway networks, it was like they knew thousands of people before social media. Pretty amazing. So there's also a running list of individuals who have denied that they have anything to do with the anonymous op-ed. First off the gate, Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo have both denied that the article was them. Now, I want to just so obviously it's speculation, but just bear with me for a second. What if, I'm wondering if the listeners saw that piece and took the time to read even just a smidgen of it, it was a New York Times deep dive piece, kind of like a vanity piece on the Conway family. And in the piece, they're interviewing the Conways, the couple. The husband is not a Trump fan. And then you've got the wife who not only ran the campaign and was the first woman to ever, run a winning presidential election campaign, but she was also, obviously a very well-known pollster. And now she's an advisor to the president. She's in the inner circle. But her husband regularly tweets out things that are negative about President Trump. So it's an interesting dynamic between the two of them. And so in this expose piece, they go back and forth with each other, and you can tell there's some tension and strain over the fact that they're not together on that. Well, then now this piece comes out. And so I saw some speculation earlier that it could be, no proof obviously, but what if it was Kellyanne Conway's husband? But does he count as a senior administration official? He would be much more likely than some of the other people that they're saying, so it's not going to be a military person, because if you served in the military and you served honorably, meaning the military way became a part of your outlook and the way you operate, an anonymous letter to a media organization, that's not the way you're going to roll. Not General Mattis, not Secretary Pompeo, who is already denied. So then you're left with other staffers that we don't really know who they are, but there are like 1,000 of them, 1,000 individuals who are working, who would be considered, due to their role, a senior Trump administration official. These individuals are people we don't know their names. We've never seen them on television. They're not talking heads, but they work at, say, the Eisenhower Executive Office Complex, which is that building that if you're looking at the White House, it's that large, multi-story, classically designed edifice directly to the right. That's actually where the majority of the people work, because everyone can't work in the White House. Even though the White House is 5 floors and 55,000 square feet and lots of people work there, the majority of the individuals work in the Eisenhower Executive Office Complex. So it's interesting that the classified, or the, not classified, but the anonymous letter comes from a senior Trump administration official, but they don't give any other designations. Also in that anonymous op-ed, there's this reference to John McCain, which is pretty telling. There's also a discussion in there that's recounted where the person who wrote the op-ed says they heard directly from another Trump aide. So if you think back, if you're working in the White House or the EEOC, you're thinking, wait, I said that. So then you think, who did I say that to? Now you know who the op-ed writer is. So it's only a matter of time before the White House sniffs this person out. And then I'm wondering what the president will do. I do wish, just on this, if wishes were unicorns and unicorns could write op-eds, on that side, I do wish that the president would refrain from adding gasoline to the fire about the op-ed. Not that, he's already said, he's already sent some tweets out. But going further, so that it doesn't continue to have traction, I would hope that he wouldn't have more tweets about it. Of course, he's a man of his own mind. He'll do whatever he wants. I seriously doubt if he listens to the show, so it's not as if I just shared anything with him. But I do think that their intention was to dominate the news cycle and to take some of the air out of this major accomplishment of choosing Supreme Court justice and the hearings that are going along with that. If this story stays at the top of the news cycle, then you don't have as many Americans paying attention to the Supreme Court pick. And it allows them to then later come back in with stories that are false or, slightly incorrect about Kavanaugh. And so I would love to see the focus go back to the hearings for the remainder of the time that the hearings are going on. And as I understand it, today's the last day. And then moving on to the next, whatever the news cycle item is. Also, in addition, because I saw some speculation about the letter being written by Dan Coates, on official letterhead, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Public Affairs Office. D&I Coates issued a statement on the New York Times anonymous op-ed saying the speculation that the New York Times op-ed was written by me or my principal deputy is patently false. We did not. So, another official on the record saying they didn't write it. We'll be back with Stephen Solomon right after this. Stay there.
Meet Roxy, nurse director for the preborn clinic in Southern California.
I have this lady, and she came and she was very scared. Boyfriend didn't want her to have a baby, and she said, I don't want this baby. We provided an ultrasound. She was laying on a table, and there it was. It was a small baby. Then she heard the heartbeat. She heard the heartbeat, and she said, well, you know, it's alive. After hearing the heartbeat, she made a decision that she was going to keep her baby. She also made a decision that day to recommit herself to Jesus.
Preborn runs and leads Christian pregnancy centers all over the country, helping abortion-minded mothers to choose life for their unborn babies. To find out more about how you can help save a baby's life, go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Are humans the enemy? Should animals have constitutional rights? Should peas be granted personhood? These questions may sound ludicrous. Nevertheless, professors and leaders in environmental rights groups are asking these questions and providing bizarre answers. Wesley J. Smith was on Point of View Radio Talk Show to discuss his documentary, The War on Humans. You can watch it on YouTube and also order the companion ebook. You will quickly see or read that these questions are not satire or science fiction. There are people who believe that humans are the problem, and the only solution is to grant legal rights to animals and plants. Some go as far as to suggest that we might find a way to reduce the human population by 90%. Now, Smith documents these claims in his video and ebook. Anti-human activists want to place all of our valuable natural resources, from oil to land, off limits for human use. Farmers could be held liable for plowing new fields because they might lead to the death of rodents, snakes, and even weeds. These ideas do not spring from the biblical concept of having dominion over the earth and being a good steward of God's creation. Instead, the environmental movement in the 1960s portrays humans as a disease, or as parasites, or a cancer hurting Mother Nature. It evolved into a nature rights movement that desires to give fauna and flora the right to exist, persist, maintain, and regenerate its vital cycles. We end up with a pantheistic idea that eliminates any distinction between humans and other life forms. These ideas don't just surface in academic settings or environmental rallies, they end up in our laws. That is why we need to counter these erroneous ideas and defend the biblical principle of human dignity. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
This is Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
So we're supposed to be having Stephen Solomon on the show, and I do not see a phone number in there for my producer. So I'm shooting off a note. If you'd like to call in, call lines are open, 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. While we wait on resolution on the guest, I want to go into a little bit more of what we've got going on. So if you're wondering why most individuals, you heard Dr. Richard Land last hour, I've been expressing this since yesterday when I found out. So many are online and all over the place talking about this and writing in conservative media outlets about how the New York Times is not to be trusted. Over at townhall.com, they have an opinion piece by Phelim McAleer, sorry, I don't mean to incorrectly state his name, Relax, President Trump. The New York Times has a history of exaggerating the seniority of anonymous officials. So in his piece, he talks about how this so-called senior official, he uses scare quotes around it, has really like this spurious claim of people in the White House considering removing the president via the 25th Amendment. And that might be the most ridiculous claim in the entire op-ed, that people who are working in the White House, instead of working for Donald Trump and having, you know, a strong sense of duty towards him, are actually, there's just a whole gaggle of them that everything he does, they're swiping papers off his desk. Like there's no security in the White House. Like there's nobody standing around in the White House. The people who actually keep the place secure aren't standing there. And if someone swiped a piece of paper off the president's desk, they wouldn't say, "What are you doing?" I mean, they act as if we're supposed to just buy this stuff wholesale. What are they thinking? It doesn't even pass the smell test. So Phelan says President Trump should relax and remember it is the New York Times after all, and that they have a scandalous history of lying about the seniority of officials that they quote anonymously, especially when the source parrots their own agenda. Now, that's kind of funny because that's exactly what's happening here. This is about their own agenda. It's about this kind of amazing idea that if they don't win the election, if one side doesn't win, then it's their duty to unseat the person who did win, to delegitimize the race, to make the American people question the legitimacy of our government, which is actually, that's what's treasonous here. That's the kind of stuff that the Russians and the Chinese would love to be able to make the American people see our government as illegitimate. But instead of it being the Russians or the Chinese, we've got a political party doing that. So there's some documentation here. A few years back, the New York Times was caught red-handed deceiving their readers in exactly the same way as they're doing right now with this anonymous op-ed. There was a lengthy anti-fracking article that they had in their paper that said that senior industry experts and insiders believe the fracking industry to be little more than a Ponzi scheme, which was set up for failure. They even had the emails from a series of senior insiders where these doubts were expressed. According to the New York Times, one energy analyst wrote, "Am I totally crazy? Am I just totally crazy? Or does it seem like everyone and their mothers are endorsing shale gas without getting a really good understanding of the economics at the business level?" Another federal analyst, scare quotes, said in an industry email, "It seems that science is pointing in one direction and industry PR is pointing in another." Unfortunately for the New York Times, the emails were from the Energy Information Agency, a government organization. So this meant Senate investigators were able to find the original emails and work out the identity of all of these different senior experts. It turns out that the federal analyst, the energy analyst, and the officer turned out to be the same person who was actually an intern when he wrote the first email and in an entry-level position when he wrote the other comments. So the paper of record misrepresented that an intern/junior employee was a senior official in order to push their anti-fracking agenda. Again, because I want to let this soak into you a little bit. The New York Times took one person's emails and attributed them to 3 different people, and then attributed those 3 different emails that were attributed to 3 different people, all 3 of those different people were claimed to be senior officials, senior experts. So if they were guilty of doing this about fracking, how much more readily would they put the same type of activity in motion to discredit the Trump administration? I think one of the things we know is that they're very, very desirous of more of these kind of Omarosa type things where someone leaves and is very disgruntled and has negative things to say. But notice, I just said, what did I just say? Omarosa. Where is she? Where is this much vaunted book that she wrote? Where are the recordings? She said she had 200. You would think with 200 recordings, she would literally be stretching out into, just into the far-reaching future with all of her different, news stories surrounding all the recordings that she made. But she's gone. She's no longer the story. That didn't even last 3 weeks. So here we are with a paper of record doing this again. Now, there was a Senate investigation, and the New York Times public editor Arthur S. Brisbane said, "Can an intern be an official? It doesn't sound right to me." But it sounded fine to the New York Times editorial board, who stood by their mislabeling of the intern low-level employee as a senior official. They later decided they didn't want their stories to be second-guessed in their own newspaper, so they ended the role of public editor. Sound familiar? So you've got New York Times public editor Arthur Brisbane questioning whether or not this anti-fracking source was all that it was cracked up to be. And upon his just questioning it in their pages, they basically said, we don't want you around here anymore. We need someone who's going to support our lies. You have to go. So then they later decided that the reporter who misrepresented the intern should be rewarded for their work against the mighty evil fracking industry, and they promoted him. Ian Urbina is now the New York Times investigative reporter based in Washington. He received a promotion for misrepresenting one single low-level source as 3 separate high-level sources. He was rewarded for lying. So now that he's an investigative reporter, you can see how it's possible that someone saw what happened with this guy and said, I would like to be promoted too. And right now, the thing that they're looking for is someone who can give us dirt from the inside of the Trump White House. And so if this is allowed to stand, can we not draw forward what would happen next? What do you think is on the horizon next? Well, probably we're going to see more anonymous op-eds by this same unnamed individual, and that same unnamed individual would be leaking from the White House and providing a steady stream of negative coverage to the New York Times, for which they'll probably make that person a member of the editorial board. And we won't know who the person is, and if they're really a high-level official, or if they're just someone who so what if you were a high-level official? If they were willing to fudge the story for this other person in the fracking industry and make him out to be something that he wasn't, then why wouldn't they do the same thing for this anonymous source? How do we know it's one person and not 3 or 4? How do we know they're high level instead of them being someone who just works in the White House during the day and has a day pass? How do we know this is a person who's actually in the inner ring of the Trump orbit to be able to make the comments that they're making, as opposed to someone who works in the Eisenhower office complex and eats lunch over there and rarely goes into the White House at all? There are many, many, many people who work in the Eisenhower executive office complex who do not go into the White House on a regular basis. They don't work in the White House. They work in the EEOC. They don't have to be high ranking to work over there either. You only need to have a pass that grants you access to the EEOC. So, I mean, with the number of people that are working in the Trump administration, with the sheer number of individuals who have hard passes and are able to get into the EEOC, with the sheer number of individuals who no longer work there but maybe have a bone to pick and maybe wrote an op-ed before they left the White House. Well, do you see that rabbit trail we're starting to tiptoe down? We could go all the way down there, down the rabbit trail, and keep on running for years and years and years and years on speculation, and it could be this, it could be that, yada, yada, yada. Without a name and accurate verification, this story has no more credibility than their completely debunked fracking story, which coincidentally they never issued a correction for. They never corrected the record on that. So is it possible that they're funding a spate of these anonymous op-eds? I wonder if the president should just ignore it completely. Just don't give it any more oxygen at all. I know he said they've got snakes and yada yada yada, but I'm just wondering if he should do anything at all with this, because it is something that can't be verified. So the more the president talks about it and gives it oxygen, the longer the story hangs around, but it's never verified. Unless they're able to find out who it is and present that information to the American people and just say, hey, look, we found out who it is. We know who it is. So obviously the train to stop Kavanaugh, the protesters, everything else that's going on, it's not panning out the way the Democrats had hoped it would. And my hope is that just like Sotomayor and Kagan were given hearings, they were asked tough questions, and then they were given a vote, that the same thing will happen with Kavanaugh. Vote up, vote down, but not anything other than that. So we've still got call lines open for you, 866-963-2037. So we've talked a little bit about the anonymous sourcing and, the president's tweets about it. And we did mention the international flight from the Emirates that came through. And so now there's a little bit more of development going on with that story. The CDC is now investigating after multiple passengers fall ill on a separate international flight coming into Philadelphia's international airport. This is crazy. 12 passengers arriving at the airport on American Airlines, so not UAE, from Paris and Munich experienced flu-like symptoms. Multiple ambulances were dispatched to the airport. The information from CBS 3, David Spunt, he says Philadelphia International Airport statement in reference to the sick passengers. This afternoon, 12 passengers arriving at Philadelphia International Airport on international flights on American Airlines from Paris and American Airlines from Munich were experiencing flu-like symptoms. As a precaution, all passengers on the two flights, totaling about 250 plus crew, were held for a medical review, and the CDC was notified. CDC, the Philadelphia Health Department, and Philadelphia Fire Department personnel performed medical evaluations and assessments, and the passengers, except for the 12 affected, are in the process of being released. Airport operations were not impacted during this time. The 250 passengers and crew on the flights were held for medical review, and they're saying that they performed medical evaluations. The passengers who did not fall ill are in the process of being released. It is not yet known what caused the people to become sick. No one was transported away in an ambulance after that. And this is as of really just like 10 minutes ago. This is breaking news from about 10 minutes ago from today. Really, what is going on? I hope that when they say the CDC is investigating, they're actually looking at this as from all different aspects. What could this be? What could this be coming from? And in addition, another breaking news story out of Philadelphia having to do with their transportation in the airport. They actually had a woman stopped by the TSA who had a handgun at their international checkpoint there. So lots of interesting travel news. And, what are you going to do? I guess you can't stop American citizens from coming into the country even if they've fallen ill on an aircraft. And after you've evaluated them, I hope they're getting their names and addresses and everything so they can follow up and make sure that they're fine and make sure that there's not anything contagious that's being spread around. So we've got AFR.net, American Family Radio, AFR.net, and also UrbanFamilyTalk.com. You can go over to Urban, and we often have polls over there. And when we have our polls, it's really a way for us to check with our listeners and find out what you guys are thinking about different issues that are going on in the country. And also, we have an op-ed by Daryl B. Harrison, who is a fantastic writer, and he talks about how it's not about Kaepernick. Now, this is interesting because Daryl Harris he's a fantastic Christian writer, and he talks about the 30th anniversary campaign. We covered this a little bit on the show a couple days ago about the Just Do It ad, the $3.8 billion in market share that they lost when they made the announcement, etc. And he's got an interesting piece over here. I would encourage you to go there at urbanfamilytalk.com. It's on the homepage, and click it and take a look. We will be back with more right after this. Stay there. Stacey on the Right.
What does it take to live an uncommon life? Here's former Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy with today's uncommon moment.
After the journey of writing our first book, Quiet Strength, God impressed upon me and my co-author Nathan Whitaker that his measurement of success had little to do with sales numbers. We were blessed to have great numbers, but that's not what made the book a success in God's eyes. God's scorecard is different from ours. He doesn't judge by money, statistics, or fame, but by the state of our hearts and our desire to serve Him. God calls us to be faithful, not successful. Real success often happens behind the scenes, and only God can measure it accurately. The only thing that's really important is that His purposes are accomplished.
New York Times best-selling author Tony Dungy. Discover more at CoachDungy.com. That's CoachDungy.com.
Family is an institution set forth by God, one man and one woman for life, with the outflow being children produced by that union. It's obvious to all that there is an attack on the family in our country, and especially on fathers. Whether it's the cycle of sin that persists in our families or the pressure from our government to exclude men from being intimately involved, the strategic battle is on for the souls of men. Join us in the battle to strengthen fatherhood. UrbanFamilyTalk.com.
It's time to call your senators. We need to tell them to put an end to the liberals' filibuster, switch to a majority vote, and defund Planned Parenthood. Call the Capitol Switchboard at 202-224-3121 or go to afaaction.net. Senators respond to constituent calls. So call 202-224-3121 and tell your senators to switch to a majority vote and defund Planned Parenthood. Your call will make a difference.
Saving you money on Linda Bell with the Fox Business Network. Everyone wants to be paid what they're worth for the job they're doing. So if you're considering negotiating a pay raise with your current employer, Oliver Cook, Executive Director, Head of North America at Selby Jennings, says you need to do your homework.
Go out there and actually get a good perspective for what people in your role in similar types of firms at a similar seniority are getting paid.
Cook says you should choose the right time and place for the discussion.
Typically a neutral location is often great to have that conversation. Maybe ideally outside of the office, over lunch, maybe over a drink after work, for example.
He says your annual review is a great time to discuss a salary increase with your boss.
You know, you want to make sure that you're at the forefront of those conversations, and you're making your case to the management team prior to those conversations taking place and decisions being made.
Saving you money on Linda Bell, Fox News.
You can watch a live stream of the show on Facebook or YouTube at Stacey on the Right. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Senator Cotton. I want to commend both of you for your appearance here today for what was no doubt going to be some uncomfortable questions. And I want to commend your companies for making it available. I wish I could say the same about Google. I think both of you should, and your company should wear it as a badge of honor that the Chinese Communist Party has blocked you from operating in their country. Perhaps Google didn't send a senior executive today because they've recently taken actions such as terminating cooperation they had with the American military on programs like artificial intelligence that are designed not just to protect our troops and help them fight and win our country's wars, but to protect civilians as well. This is at the very same time that they continue to cooperate with the Chinese Communist Party on matters like artificial intelligence, or partner with Huawei and other Chinese telecom companies that are effectively arms of the Chinese Communist Party. And credible reports suggest that they are working to develop a new search engine that would satisfy the Chinese Communist Party's censorship standards after having disclaimed any intent to do so 8 years ago. Perhaps they didn't send a witness to answer these questions because there is no answer to those questions. And the silence we would hear right now from the Google chair would be reminiscent of the silence that that witness would provide. So I just want to ask both of you, would your companies ever consider taking these kinds of actions that privilege a hostile foreign power over the United States and especially our men and women in uniform? Ms. Sandberg.
I'm not familiar with the specifics of this at all, but based on how you're asking the question, I don't believe so.
Also no.
Wow. Welcome back to the program. StaceyOnTheRight.com, Stacey on the Right on Twitter and Instagram. So what's going on here? You're listening to Cotton, Senator Tom Cotton, Republican, Arkansas, questioning Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey and Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg on Capitol Hill about their commitment to U.S. national security and what their companies have done to counter foreign influence operations on social media platforms. Now, here's what's super important about that. We are watching as our social media companies, in an attempt to have operations in countries that don't have the same kinds of freedoms that we have, as they adjust their platforms to comply with communist demands. In China, they don't have a free and open internet. Chinese citizens are not allowed to mock their leader. They're not allowed to say bad things about their leader. If you're actually a member of the Communist Party, you're supposed to openly advocate for Xiaoping and all of his policies. And if you're a member of the party, you're also not allowed to say anything bad about communism. So if you're just a regular citizen, what they're doing is, in addition to controlling what people can see, controlling what answers you get back when you type something into your search window, they want to be able to monitor their citizens. They want certain things to be in place that permit them to do things that in a communist country, you're like a piece of property. You're like a chair or, this coffee mug. You are needed until you're no longer needed, and you have to toe the line. Basically it's slavery. And with Google, they chose not to show up to the hearing, and they are actually cooperating with these weird requests from the Chinese government. So Cotton asked a few questions of them. Do you see a difference between cooperating with the U.S. government and the Russian government or the Chinese government? Do you prefer to see America remain the dominant global superpower? Dorsey said, I prefer that we continue to help everywhere we serve, and we are pushing towards that. Dorsey also said, CEO of Twitter, we need to be consistent about our terms of service. Cotton pushed back on the idea that Twitter must approach business with the governments of Russia or China in the same way it will cooperate with the U.S. government. Dorsey replied, what I meant was a consistency of our terms of service. There will always be exceptions, but we want to have those go through due legal process. Cotton also asked about something called Data Miner, DATAMINR, which is an official Twitter analytics partner. And this is really it's mind-blowing, because Jack Dorsey can't even keep his liberal employees from throttling down conservatives on Twitter, but he's dealing with the Russians and the Chinese. It seems to me like he would want to slow down these expansions into foreign markets until he could get his American employees to simply abide by the tenets of American society, which is free and open society, free speech, and the ability to not have your political ideology crushed in favor of the opposing political ideology based on which employee is looking at your account. So when they were talking about this data miner, the unofficial Twitter analytics partner, they were also kind of probing the company's cooperation with Russian proxies in the past. And Dorsey said the issue was separate from the decision to no longer allow RT, Russia Today, and Sputnik to advertise on the platform. He said that Twitter revoked Russian-funded media networks' ability to advertise once they found out about their role in the 2016 election. Dorsey estimated that RT and Sputnik had spent $1.9 million on Twitter, and he said, in consequence of that, we donated $1.9 million to nonprofits. In other words, they didn't want to profit off of Russian meddling in the election. Cotton concluded his time by asking Dorsey and Sandberg about WikiLeaks and their controversial founder, Julian Assange, who Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, while director of the CIA, classified as a non-state hostile intelligence service. The committee has agreed with that assessment now for a couple of years now in a row. WikiLeaks remains active on both Twitter and Facebook, in spite of the designation. Julian Assange is also on Twitter, despite the designation. So, Ms. Sandberg, why does Facebook allow WikiLeaks and Assange to remain active? She was asked this by Senator Cotton. Sandberg responded that she wouldn't defend WikiLeaks or the actions of any page or actor on our platform, but WikiLeaks has been public information. It's available broadly on other media, and as such, it does not violate our terms of service and remains up on our site. Dorsey similarly answered, we also have not found any violation of our terms of service, but we are also open to any law enforcement insight that would indicate a violation of our terms. So if you can find a violation of our terms that we have overlooked, we would definitely be willing to consider it. Wow. So they can be pretty neutral when they want to. But when it comes to throttling down conservatives, they're definitely not neutral. He's even had to admit in recent weeks that his employees have a left-leaning bias and that he's not always able to stop them from executing that on users on Facebook and Twitter. Well, users on Twitter, Dorsey admitting to that on Twitter. So it's kind of, it's like, it's weird. I was going to say it's fascinating, but it's not fascinating. It's weird. It's weird and it's uncool and it's not okay. It's not okay that they continually allow the kind of pressure tactics on conservatives. So over at Market Watch, they're talking about a lot of kind of fear-mongering over a so-called tech wreck. The NASDAQ composite is on pace for its worst week since March 23rd. And I just think it's pretty interesting. And then they also have incorrectly reported on this Cory Booker story over here at MarketWatch.com. He did not release Kavanaugh documents that were classified. They weren't classified. They were declassified or made available the night before. This isn't hard information for anyone to find. So they're also reporting that the shrinking of America's middle class is finally ground to a halt, which is great news. And it's news that should be trumpeted everywhere because it's a result of the Trump economy. So you've got upper and lower classes increasing their size over the past decade. And this is a great turnaround story because at one point, the American middle class had appeared to be shrinking, decade over decade. Just over half, at 52%, of American adults lived in a middle-class household in 2016. That's up slightly from 51% in 2011, but down from 54% in 2001, and a whopping 61% of households in 1971. Now, what can we connect those two things to? In 1971, the number of households that were married in an intact traditional marriage, their first marriage, was much higher than it is now. The divorce rate was much lower. The out-of-wedlock birth rate was just amazingly lower than it is now. But I don't see any connection here in their reporting. The fact is, the higher the out-of-wedlock birth rate, the lower the number of people are going to be able to make it into the middle class. A hallmark of middle-class families in America is that they are two-parent households. A man and a woman married to each other. They have no kids before they enter the union, and they are able to achieve the American dream. Why they don't note that, I guess because it's Market Watch, but they could note that Cory Booker released some documents. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of a double standard there on what they can report, what's considered to be news. And I've actually had people say, oh, you're always drumming the whole traditional marriage thing. Well, somebody's got to talk about it. Somebody's got to tell the truth to people who are considering, well, I just want to be a mom, or he's my boyfriend. If we have a baby together, it's just not that big of a deal. Yeah, it is. It's a big deal. And for women who largely these decisions rely with us because it's a yes or a no from the woman that precipitates the whole thing, we've got to start being smarter about the way we start families. if you're not married, you shouldn't be starting a family. And so if you're in a situation where you're already a single mom, am I condemning you? No. But I'm talking about people who are not in that situation already. If you're not already a single mom, you shouldn't plan on being one. If you end up being a single mom through widowhood or some other unforeseen circumstance, God works with us all. There's no condemnation. But goodness gracious, there's just an explosion of young people deciding that they're going to go ahead and have a baby with their boyfriend and be a single parent. And then we're shocked over at MarketWatch.com when, yes, we've now hit the bottom and we're kind of trying to climb back up. But if we're ever to get back to that 61% of Americans, that number from 1970, 61% of Americans living in middle-class households, then we have to reverse the trend towards single parenthood. Also, divorce is another wealth zapper. People who get divorced are much less likely to achieve wealth when they reach their, kind of third trimester of life. You got your first, where you're growing, getting an education, entering the adult workforce. And then you have the middle, where you're marrying, having kids, raising kids into adulthood, kind of booting them out of the house. Then you have that last part of your life, that last segment, that last third, is where most Americans who are going to achieve wealth, that's where they reach that point. Their earnings peak, their savings peak. They no longer have children at home. They're able to do a lot more with their money, savings, investings, etc. And they're able to get into wealth. Well, you can't get there if you're a single parent trying to battle somebody in court every other month for child support payments, or not getting any child support payments at all because you haven't seen that guy since the baby was born or before that. Nobody wants to tell the truth. It's as if telling the truth is some kind of offensive act, when most people would say, if you have any sense, you hear someone give you that warning and you're like, oh, so that's what I need to do. So it's really just a decision that I'm making. It's not about some, invisible white guy who's controlling all the things from behind a black curtain. It's not about America being a racist ethno-state or a place that, only white people can survive in. It's about making the decision, I'm just not going to have any kids before I get married. And then getting married and then having the kids. And it's not about only having one or two kids. You can have all the kids you want. It's about doing things in proper order. Lining yourself up for blessings, some of which include living in a middle-class household in America, which makes you at the very tip of the spear on this planet for great living conditions, great opportunities. I mean, middle class here in America is like upper middle class in Europe. It's all you have to do is make some good choices. So in the piece a little further down, they start quoting, and this always comes into these stories. Nearly half of Americans, at 49%, consider themselves to be middle class, and only 1/3 of those that do are still satisfied with their financial situation. And this is according to a survey of 2,000 people, which was conducted by market research group Mental. Americans want access to opportunities that improve the overall quality of their lives. This attitude may be related to income inequality. There it is. With people of average incomes feeling relatively unsatisfied with what they have compared to the top 1%. So you're still working on things. It's okay. I hate that they say income inequality. You should be competing with yourself. So what did you make last year? Are you making more than that this year due to your hard work, determination, and effort? Oh, and also prayer. Instead of saying that person over there is earning a whole lot more money than me, how about you just worry about yourself? You will make more strides in earning money worrying about yourself and improving yourself than you will sitting up looking at somebody else who has something. It says 71% of college degrees consider themselves middle class, with just 58% of people with high school diploma or less, according to a survey by Gallup. Yet college graduates in 2017 are shouldering $1.3 trillion in student debt. Put down the, gender studies degrees and get a degree in science, technology, engineering, or math. And then you'll be making more money. All right, that's the show. We'll be back with more tomorrow. God bless you. Have a great night.